I've deliberately kept all the elements that we've got there rhythmically very simple. Like the kick is just playing every beat. The tom bass is quite simple. The hat is literally just playing every offbeat. The rims are playing 16ths. So none of those elements have really got anything particularly interesting going on rhythmically. And the reason for that is that we want those to just form a bit of a bed for us to sit our more interesting top end elements on top of, which is what we're going to do now. So we're going to try playing with some different length loops, which should create these interesting polyrhythms, which gives you that kind of hypnotic feel that really suits this style. So for the first one of those, I'm going to get this other 909 rim shot here. And drop that in. And before we get started, we want to really mess this sound up. We want it to be something really crunchy, barely distinguishable as what it is, to be honest. So I'm going to do that using Ableton's Saturator on the Wave Shaper mode, which is hidden away, but it's a great little feature. So if we go to Audio Effects here, and Saturator, and in the different modes here, Analog Clip is the typical one, and there's a fair few others, but if you go all the way to the bottom there is Wave Shaper. Now, Wave Shaper is a very sort of drastic distortion. It's definitely not one for adding a little bit of warmth to things, but if you want to really mess things up and go to town on them, this is probably the best mode on Saturator. So we can open this up here, and it's these extra controls that give you a lot of the scope to do the really weird stuff. So if we open up that there, and I'll just keep hitting a note of this and play around with some of those parameters until we get something that sounds interesting. As you can hear, this periods control here is one that really sort of takes things into the messed up territory. Okay, that's sounding suitably messed up now. So I'm going to add a low pass filter over the top of that just to take a little bit of the harshness out of it. And I'm going to add a bit of envelope follower on that so that the envelope sort of moves opening and closing over each note a little bit. Okay, now we're going to get a pattern in for this. So I'm going to create a new clip here. But rather than the typical length, which would be a bar or 2 beats or a beat, I'm going to drag this down so it's a beat and a half, which starts to give you some quite interesting rhythms. So let's make a very simple little pattern in there, just 2 notes like that. And hear how that sounds in context. Just going to pitch that down slightly on here, so make sure warp is off and just pitch it down a couple of semitones. And because this loop is repeating not on a whole number of beats, you get that kind of polyrhythmic thing going on where it kind of feels like a constantly evolving pattern because it hits a different point in the bar each time. And it's a really good way of getting that sort of trippy kind of feel on this sort of techno. Just going to add one more little note in there to make it a little bit more interesting. Sounding pretty good. Going to add a little bit of reverb to that and also a little bit of delay on the channel itself. So that sounds nice. As you can hear, there's quite a lot of modulation we can do as the track's running. So by moving the filter more open or more closed using the envelope control here or the cutoff, we can kind of make that sound ebb and flow in the mix a bit. So whilst that sounds nice and interesting, it'd probably be even cooler if we had another sound doing the similar rhythm bouncing off it. So you've got almost two things doing their own little thing separate from the rest of the track. So I'm going to use the atmospheric sound that we used before, but do something different with it. So if we make a new MIDI track again and add that atmosphere sample in there, turn warp off, and I'm going to play a little bit higher up the keyboard this time. So the original pitch is here. I'm going to try it kind of an octave up, somewhere up there. So it's just noise, really. And we want to kind of have that doing a similar pattern so it responds to the that rim shot, the distorted rim shot, every time. Something like that. So if we look in our existing pattern here, we can see there are 6/16, 6 steps to that pattern. So we want our new sound to be playing kind of at the end here, where there's a gap in that pattern. So I'm going to do the same thing, make a new 1.5 beat long loop, and put a single note on C4 so it's an octave up on that new sound. So that's the right positioning. Let's work on the sound a little bit. Going to do a similar thing here really and just play around with the filters on it. So bring the cutoff down a little bit. Let's try the MS-20 model with a bit of drive, just so it's got a bit of beef to it. And have a little play with this. And perhaps a little bit of envelope on the filter there. So if we turn our filter envelope on, give it some amount up there. Okay, add a little bit of delay to that one as well. And as we've done with previous call and response type things, going to pan them slightly in opposite directions.